My principal caught me kissing his son in his office. God, I've been sleeping with them both. Get away from my son. The voice boomed through the office like a gunshot, freezing me in place. My lips were still pressed against Sebastian's when the words hit me. As we separated, it was Principal Adam Reed, standing at the doorway, his face beet red with anger. Shit. Dad? Sebastian's voice was just as shocked as mine. Wait, what? My mind frantically started to piece things together. Sebastian's dad, Adam, our principal. He was Adam, the Adam who I'd spent the last year in a whirlwind of intensity and passion. Adam, Mr. Reed stepped fully into the room, his presence commanding like it always was. What the hell is going on here? His voice was tight and controlled, but I could see the anger simmering just below the surface. I don't know, I stammered, my eyes flicking from Sebastian to Adam. How could I have known? None of this made any sense. The universe couldn't be this cruel. Didn't know what? Sebastian asked, his brows furrowed in confusion. He looked between us, waiting for someone to make this all make sense. But how could I explain this? How could I tell him that the guy he'd been dating, the guy he just kissed, had a past with his father? Adam's jaw clenched, his fist balled at his sides. Sebastian, leave us. You are dismissed. But, Sebastian started, but Adam cut him off with a sharp look. Now, Adam's voice left no room for argument. Without another word, Seb was out of the door, leaving me all alone under the gaze that I once had longed for. Flashback starts. About 2 years ago. I still remember how nervous I was the first time I got sent to the Principal Reed's office. It was my first semester as a freshman, and I'd already managed to get into trouble. It wasn't anything major, just a stupid prank that had gone a little too far, but it was enough to land me in front of the principal. Honestly, I half expected some grumpy old man to bark at me to come in, as I knocked on the principal's door, but when the door opened, I was caught off guard. Principal Reed was standing there, looking nothing like I had imagined, tall with sharp features and dark hair that were just starting to show hints of gray. He looked more like someone's ridiculously fit older brother than a principal. Come in, he said, his voice calm but authoritative. I stepped inside, trying not to let my nerves show, and he shut the door behind me. So, Axel, he began, sitting down behind his desk. Do you want to tell me what happened? I swallowed hard and nodded. It was just a prank, sir. I didn't mean for it to go that far. He raised an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair as he looked me over. There was something in his gaze that made me shift uncomfortably. A prank, huh? And you thought it'd be funny to disrupt class? I didn't think it through, I admitted, feeling more embarrassed by the second. I'm sorry. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just kept looking at me with the same intense expression. Finally, he stood up and walked around the desk, stopping in front of me. I looked up at him, trying to read his expression, but it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. You know, he said slowly, I see a lot of students come through this office. Most of them are either scared out of their minds or too cocky for their own good. But you're different. My heart skipped a beat at the way he said it. How, sir? He smiled slightly, just a hint of something playing at the corners of his mouth. You're confident but not arrogant, and you're honest. I like that. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded, feeling my face heat up under his gaze. There was something about the way he was looking at me that made my pulse race, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Before I could say anything else, he reached out and gently lifted my chin, so I was forced to meet his eyes. You're a handsome young man, Axel, and I can tell you're smart too, but you need to be careful. Don't let that confidence get you into more trouble than you can handle. His words were stern, but his touch was light, almost gentle. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized how close he was standing. Close enough that I could smell his cologne, woodsy and warm. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe as he studied me with those dark eyes. Sir, I started to say, but he cut me off, his thumb brushing over my bottom lip. Adam, he corrected, his voice low. Call me Adam. My breath hitched in my throat as he leaned in closer, his hand still under my chin. I could feel the heat coming off him, and my mind was spinning. This was crazy, completely, utterly insane. But as he pressed his lips to mine, I found myself kissing him back, all thoughts of right and wrong flying out of the window. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing heavily. He looked down at me, his expression unreadable, and for a second I thought he was going to tell me to get out, that this had been a huge mistake. But instead he smiled, that same almost smirk from before, and brushed a strand of hair out of my face. I think we can work something out, he said, his voice still low, still making my heart race. If you're interested. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Whatever this was, I wasn't about to say no. And so, just like that, our relationship started. It wasn't exactly conventional. We kept it quiet. Obviously, no one could know what was happening between us. But outside of the office, Adam was different. He was charming and attentive, and when we were alone, he made me feel like I was the only person in the world who mattered. It was long before things escalated. What started as stolen kisses in his office turned into something much more. He'd take me out to dinner, buy me things, spoil me in ways I never expected. And in return, I gave him everything he wanted. It wasn't love, not really, but it was something. Something that made me feel special, wanted in a way that no one else ever had. A year ago. It's funny how things can change so quickly. How something that once felt thrilling and intoxicating can turn sour before you even realize it. About a year ago, I swear, I thought I was living in a fantasy. He was older and experienced, and he made me feel special in ways I'd never felt before. But now, a year later, that fantasy had turned into a nightmare. Adam had become controlling. At first, it was subtle, almost like he was just looking out for me. He'd check in on where I was, who I was with, what I was doing. But over time, those check-ins turned into demands, and his once charming concern started to feel more like a cage. He didn't like it when I spent time with my friends, especially if I meant that I couldn't be with him. He'd get jealous if I even talked to someone else, accusing me of things that weren't true, making me feel guilty for wanting a life outside of him. It all came to a head one night after I'd been out with some friends. We hadn't even been doing anything crazy, just hanging out, grabbing dinner, trying to blow off some steam after a long week. But Adam wasn't happy, not one bit. He called me multiple times while I was out, and when I didn't answer right away, he started blowing up my phone with texts demanding to know where I was, who I was with, and why I wasn't picking up. By the time I got back to my place, he was already there, waiting for me like some angry parent catching their kid sneaking in past curfew. The second I walked through the door, I could feel the tension radiating off him. "Where the hell have you been?" he snapped, his voice low but seething with anger. I sighed, already exhausted from the night. And now this. "I told you, Adam, I was out with friends. Why are you freaking out?" "Freaking out?" he echoed, his eyes narrowing. "You didn't answer your phone. You didn't text me back. How am I supposed to know where you are, who you're with?" "Because I told you," I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "I'm allowed to have a life, Adam. I don't need to check in with you every 5 minutes. He took a step closer, his presence looming over me like a storm cloud. "You're mine, Axel. You're supposed to be with me, not running around with whoever the hell you want." That did it. Something inside me snapped, and I felt a surge of anger I'd been holding back for months. "I'm not your property, Adam. I'm your boyfriend, not your damn prisoner." For a second, he looked taken aback, like he couldn't believe I was talking to him that way. But then his expression hardened, and he grabbed my arm. Not hard enough to hurt, but enough to make his point clear. "Don't forget who's been taking care of you, Axel. I've given you everything. I've made you who you are. You wouldn't be anything without me." His words hit like a punch to the gut, and I yanked my arm out of his grip, stepping back as if the distance could somehow make the situation less suffocating. "You're out of your mind if you think I need you, 'cause I don't," I said, my voice shaking with anger. He scoffed, crossing his arms as he glared at me. "You really think you can just walk away from this, from everything I've done for you?" I looked him dead in the eyes, feeling more certain than I'd ever felt about anything. "Yes, I do. Watch me." For a moment there was silence, and I could see the realization sink in for him. This wasn't just a fight. This was the end. He clenched his jaw, his eyes darkening with anger and something else, maybe disbelief. "You'll regret this, Axel. You'll come crawling back, and when you do, don't expect me to be waiting." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me, like a weight I'd been carrying for too long was finally lifting. "I'm not coming back. I never want to see your face again." And with that, I turned and walked away, not caring about the things he'd bought me, not caring about the life we'd built together. It wasn't worth it, not anymore. About 6 months ago. After I broke up with Adam, I swore off dating. It was a mess, and I wasn't eager to dive into another one anytime soon. For a while, it worked. I was doing fine, staying out of trouble, and keeping to myself. But then, the new semester started, and with it came a flood of fresh faces. I didn't think much of it at first, just a couple more people I'd probably never talked to. Then, one day, I saw him. He was different. I noticed him in the library, head down in a book completely focused. Black hair, green eyes, and a presence that just demanded attention. He was tall and fit and had this quiet confidence that intrigued me. I tried to ignore it, but every time I saw him, I felt that pull a little stronger. His name was Sebastian. I learned that by overhearing a conversation in the hallway. He wasn't like the other freshers who were loud and eager to make friends. Sebastian kept to himself and didn't seem to need anyone, and that only made me more curious. I kept telling myself it was just a crush, that I wasn't ready for anything serious. But the more I watched him, the more I wanted to know him. I couldn't help it. Eventually, I couldn't resist anymore. However, he soon proved that it wasn't going to be easy, and maybe it was exactly that made me even more interested in him. 2 weeks later. I remember the first time I ever hit him up. He was just sitting there with a book, as usual. I walked over trying to seem casual and plopped down in the seat across from him. He didn't even look up. "Hey," I said, leaning forward a little. He slowly pulled out one of his earbuds and glanced at me with a blank expression. "Hey?" "I'm Axel," I said, flashing what I hoped was a friendly smile. "You're new here, right?" He looked at me for a moment, like he was deciding whether or not I was worth his time. "Yeah, I'm a fresher, Sebastian." "Nice to meet you, Sebastian," I said, trying to keep the conversation going. "I know the campus can be a bit overwhelming at first. If you ever need help finding your way around, I'm your guy." "Thanks," he said, his voice polite but distant. Then he put his earbud back in and returned to his book, effectively ending the conversation. I blinked, a little taken aback by the cold response. Most people at least pretended to be interested in talking, even if they weren't, but Sebastian didn't seem to care at all. Still, I wasn't about to give up that easily. "What are you studying?" I asked, trying again. He sighed softly and pulled out his earbud again. "Engineering." "That's cool," I said, nodding like I knew anything about engineering. "I'm in business, 3rd year. If you need any tips on surviving here, I've got plenty." He nodded slightly, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't interested. "I'll keep that in mind." Then without another word, he put his earbud back in and turned his attention back to his book, completely shutting me out. Well, that didn't go as planned. I sat there for a moment, debating whether I should keep trying or just leave him alone. But something about the challenge of getting through to him made me want to stick around. I wasn't used to people brushing me off like this, and it made me all the more determined to crack his shell. "All right, I'll leave you to your reading," I said, standing up. "But don't be a stranger, okay? We're going to be seeing a lot of each other." He didn't respond, but I could see him watching me from the corner of his eye as I walked away. That was something, at least. I wasn't going to give up that easily. 3 days later. A few days after our first encounter, I spotted Sebastian sitting alone in the cafeteria. He was eating lunch, headphones in as usual, and once again seemed completely absorbed in his own world. Most people gave him a wide berth, probably sensing his unapproachable vibe, but I wasn't most people. I grabbed my tray and made a beeline for his table. "Mind if I sit here?" I asked, even though I was already sitting down. He looked up at me, his expression as unreadable as ever. "It's a free country." "Thanks," I said with a grin, ignoring the lack of enthusiasm in his voice. "I figured I'd keep you company. You look like you could use some." He didn't respond, he just continued eating. But he didn't tell me to leave either, so I took that as a win. "So, how's the engineering life treating you?" I asked, trying to get him to talk. "It's fine," he said after a moment, not looking up. "You don't say much, do you?" I teased lightly. He finally glanced at me, a fake smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm just not a big talker." "Fair enough," I said with a shrug. "But you should know, I'm not going to stop trying to get you to open up. I'm a pretty persistent guy." "I've noticed," he said dryly, and I couldn't help but laugh. "Look, I'm just trying to get to know you," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You seem like an interesting guy, and I'd like to be friends or something of that sort." He stared at me for a long moment, like he was trying to figure out if I was serious. "You don't even know me." "Yet," I corrected him, "but I'm hoping to change that." Sebastian didn't say anything, just went back to his lunch. I could tell I wasn't making much progress, but at least he wasn't completely shutting me out anymore. That was something, right? We sat in silence for a few minutes before I decided to give it one last shot. "So, do you have any plans for this weekend? Maybe we could hang out, catch a movie or something?" He finally looked up at me, and for a second, I thought he might actually agree. But then he shook his head. "I've got a lot of studying to do." I tried not to let the disappointment show on my face. "All right, maybe another time then." "Maybe," he said, but I could tell he wasn't really interested. I finished my lunch in silence, feeling like I was getting nowhere. But I wasn't about to give up just yet. Something about Sebastian intrigued me, and I wasn't ready to walk away. I could be patient when I needed to be, and if there was one thing I knew, it was that I was going to find a way to get through to him, no matter how long it took. 3 weeks later. It took a few more weeks of casual conversations and random encounters before I finally made any real progress with Sebastian. It was as sudden as it was surprising when one day, out of the blue, Sebastian approached me after class. "Hey, Axel." I looked up surprised. It was the first time he'd ever sought me out. "Hey, Sebastian, what's up?" He shifted awkwardly like he wasn't sure how to start. "About that movie you mentioned a while back, is that offer still on the table?" I had to bite back a grin. "Yeah, you bet it is. You free this weekend?" He nodded. "Saturday?" "Perfect," I said, trying to play it cool, even though I was buzzing with excitement inside. "I'll text you the details." Saturday couldn't come fast enough. When it finally did, we met up outside the theater. Sebastian looked as calm and collected as ever, but there was a hint of nervousness in his eyes that I found oddly satisfying. We watched the movie, and afterwards I suggested we grab a bite to eat. He agreed, and we ended up at a small diner nearby. The conversation was easier this time and more natural. He even laughed a couple of times, which felt like a huge victory. After dinner, we walked around for a bit, just talking. The more we talked, the more I realized how much I liked being around him. Maybe he felt the same. Otherwise, how could we ever end in my bed right after our first date? I wasn't planning on anything happening, but the chemistry between us was undeniable. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, we were kissing. Then more. It was intense, passionate, and everything I'd hoped it would be. 3 months ago. Bunking classes with Sebastian quickly became one of my favorite things to do. There was something exhilarating about it, knowing we were supposed to be somewhere else, but choosing to be together instead. "Hey, how about you skip the next class?" I suggested with a mischievous grin. Sebastian raised an eyebrow, but I could see the hint of a smile playing on his lips. "And do what, exactly?" I grabbed his hand and started pulling him in the direction of the campus garden. "You'll see." We found a quiet spot under a large oak tree, far enough from the main path that no one would notice us. The sun was shining and the air was warm, a perfect day to ditch class. We sat down on the grass, leaning against the tree trunk, and I pulled out my phone to play some music. "Is this your big plan?" Sebastian teased, though he didn't seem to mind. He stretched out his legs, looking completely at ease. "Well, I figured we could use a break," I said, lying down on his lap. "And honestly, I'd rather spend time with you than sit in another boring lecture." He glanced down at me, his eyes softening. "You're really something, Axel." I shrugged. "Yeah, well, I like to think I'm full of surprises." We spent the rest of the afternoon just lounging around, talking about everything and nothing. It was easy, comfortable, like we'd known each other for years instead of just a few weeks. At one point, I leaned my head on his shoulder and he didn't pull away. Instead, he wrapped his arm around me, pulling me closer. As we sat there in the warm afternoon sun, I realized how much I was starting to care about him. It wasn't just about the chase anymore. Sebastian had become someone I genuinely enjoyed being around, and I wanted more moments like this. Just the two of us, away from the rest of the world. A week later. One of my favorite things about dating Sebastian was how we didn't need to do anything fancy to have a good time. One Saturday afternoon, we decided to go for a walk in the park. It was one of those perfect days, clear skies, a light breeze, and just the right amount of sunshine. We wandered through the park, hand in hand, not really talking much, but just enjoying each other's company, until we found an empty bench under a large tree and decided to sit down for a while. I leaned back, closing my eyes and soaking in the warmth of the sun. Beside me, Sebastian was quiet, but I could feel the steady presence of him next to me, which was all I needed. After a few minutes, I opened my eyes and turned to him. "You know, I could get used to this." He glanced at me, a small smile tugging at his lips. "What, the park?" "No," I said, laughing softly. "Just being with you. It feels right." His smile widened and he looked away for a moment as if he was thinking something over. Then he turned back to me, his expression serious but soft. "I feel the same way, Axel. I love you." My eyes widened at his confession, and before I knew it, I leaned in and kissed him. It was slow and tender, filled with all the things we didn't need to say out loud. As we pulled away, I rested my head on his shoulder, feeling completely content. I didn't know what the future held for us, but in that moment, I was sure of one thing. I was falling for Sebastian, and I didn't want this feeling to ever end. Flashback ends. About an hour ago. The college fest was supposed to be one of the best days of the year. Music, food, games, and just hanging out with friends. But for me and Sebastian, things took a sharp turn from fun to chaotic. We were just walking back from the food stalls when this dude, clearly drunk and spoiling for a fight, started making snide comments about us. "Hey, look at these two," he sneered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "They think they're so special just because they're together." I tried to ignore him, but Sebastian's face was red, and I could see the tension building. "Let's just keep walking," I suggested, grabbing his hand and pulling him away. But the guy wasn't done. He stumbled after us, slurring his word. "What's the matter? Too sissy to fight back?" I turned around, trying to stay calm. "Just leave us alone." He shoved Sebastian, and that was it. I lost it. "Hey, back off," I shouted, stepping in between them. Sebastian tried to hold me back, but it was too late. The guy swung at me, and I dodged, landing a punch of my own. That's when it all turned into a mess of fists and shouting. It wasn't just me and him anymore. A crowd had gathered, and people were yelling for someone to break it up. The professors arrived quickly, and it was like they had been waiting for something to go wrong. They managed to separate us, but not before the guy had taken a pretty bad hit. His nose was bleeding heavily, and he looked like he was about to pass out. "We're taking him to the medical unit," one of the professors said, his face stern. "You two, Axel and Sebastian, come with us." Sebastian and I exchanged worried glances as we followed them. We were led to the principal's office, the last place I ever wanted to be at. Thankfully, it was empty at that moment, but that didn't stop my head from going into a frantic rush. As I stood there, all I could think about was how I would face the principal after everything that happened, until I looked at Seb, feeling the adrenaline wear off and the embarrassment kick in. "I'm really sorry about that," I said in a small voice. "I didn't mean to drag you into all this." Sebastian shook his head, looking more amused than upset. "It's not your fault. That guy was a jerk, and anyway, I was right there with you." I sighed in relief. "Yeah, I guess you were." There was a moment of awkward silence as we both seemed to be lost in our own thoughts. I was about to say something else when Sebastian suddenly leaned in and kissed me. It was unexpected, but it felt amazing. Soft, gentle, nothing like the chaotic energy from earlier. I was just about to pull away and say something when the door burst open. The principal walked in, his face a mix of shock and fury. "Get away from my son," he shouted, his voice echoing through the room. Back to the present. As Seb left the office, I couldn't help but wish it was all just a dream. Well, it felt like one, and not a good one. Adam was glaring at me now, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "So you're the one dating my son?" "Yeah, I guess I am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "But I didn't know he was your son until just now." His face turned sinister, more than usual if possible. And here I was thinking I'd seen everything. This is a new one. He looked at me with a cold, assessing stare. "Axel, I'm going to make this very clear. You have a choice to make. Either you do exactly as I say, or I'll tell Sebastian everything about our past." My heart sank. The principal's words hit me like a ton of bricks. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He walked up to me, leaned in closer, his voice low but firm. "I want you to stay away from Sebastian and be with me again. If you don't cooperate, I'll make sure Sebastian knows everything about our relationship." I felt a mix of anger and desperation. "You can't be serious." "Oh, but I am," Adam said, his voice cold and unwavering. "I suggest you think long and hard about your next move." I stood up feeling helpless and defeated. I wanted to say something to retort to him, but I knew it wasn't the right moment. As I walked out of the office, I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. Things were far from over. 2 weeks later. For days, I tried to distance myself from Sebastian. It wasn't that I wanted to. I was just terrified of what might happen if his father made good on his threat. I avoided him at all costs, making excuses of why I couldn't see him, and keeping my phone off most of the time. Every time I saw him trying to reach out, it just made my stomach churn with guilt. One afternoon, I was holed up in my dorm room, trying to focus on my assignments, when the door slammed open and Sebastian stormed in, looking more determined than I'd ever seen him. "Axel," he yelled, his voice filled with frustration and anger. "We need to talk now." I stood up from my desk, my heart racing. "Sebastian, I didn't expect you." "No more excuses," he cut me off, his face set in a hard line. "I've been trying to get through to you for days. You owe me an explanation." I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I know. I'm sorry. I didn't want to drag you into more trouble. Sebastian's eyes narrowed, but his voice softened. I want to hear the truth, Axel, not excuses. What's really going on? I hesitated, but the look in his eyes, determined yet hurt, made me realize I couldn't keep avoiding the truth. I sat down on the edge of my bed and motioned for him to join me. Your father and I were sort of in a relationship about a year ago, I confessed. Sebastian's eyes widened, but he stayed silent, listening intently. I thought it was just a fling at first, but it turned into something more serious. He started supporting me financially, and I guess in a way he became like a sugar daddy to me. We were together for a while, but things got a little out of hand. Your father grew really controlling and toxic. Eventually, I broke up with him. I didn't want to be with someone who was so manipulative and controlling. Sebastian's expression shifted from shock to disbelief. My dad? You're talking about the principal. My dad? I nodded, feeling a pang of guilt. Yeah, I didn't know how to handle it, and I didn't know you were his son. Not until that day in his office. Sebastian's face was a mix of anger and confusion. I can't believe this. My dad was cheating on my mom and you were part of it? God, I had never thought about this until now. It wasn't right, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, and I'm sorry for dragging you into this mess. I should have told you sooner, but I didn't want to complicate things. Sebastian's anger seemed to dissolve into a kind of sad resignation. It's not your fault. I'm hurt. I thought I knew my dad, but now it's like I don't even know him. I could see the pain in his eyes, and it broke my heart. I understand. I wish there was something I could do. Sebastian took a deep breath, his expression softening. I appreciate you telling me the truth. It's a lot to process. I can't blame you for what my dad did. It's not your fault, and thank you for being honest with me. I felt a wave of relief wash over me as I looked at him and nodded. We sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. I wanted to reach out and comfort him, but I didn't want to overstep. Finally, Sebastian looked at me with a small, tentative smile. So, where does this leave us? He asked softly. I shrugged, feeling a mix of hope and uncertainty. I don't know what the future holds. I just know that I care about you a lot, and I want to be honest with you. If you're willing to work through this, I'm here. Sebastian nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's a lot, but I think maybe we can figure it out. It's going to take some time, but I'm willing to try. But I need some time. I understand. Sebastian stood up and took my hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. Thanks for telling me the truth. It means a lot. And left. As I watched him leave, I felt a mixture of relief and fear. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least now we were facing it with honesty. I was grateful that Sebastian didn't blame me for his father's actions. It was more than I can ask for, but I knew in my heart that I wanted so much more. I wanted a chance to work things out with him. Conclusion. Soon I learned that Sebastian's mom divorced his dad and threatened him to leave town, or she'd expose everything to the family. Faced with no other choice, he resigned from the university and left. Despite the chaos, Sebastian and I decided to rebuild our relationship from scratch. This time we took things slow, focusing on honesty and support. The challenges we had faced together only made our bond stronger, and through that, we found something beautiful. Now our relationship is stronger than ever, and we're ready to face whatever may come next, knowing that we've got each other's backs. The end. Do you think Axel did the right thing by telling Sebastian the truth? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become part of our Rainbow Force. And stay wholesome.